What really happens in the avoidance mind during no contact? When we talk about no contact, most people imagine it's just about creating silence, drawing a line, or cutting someone off. But when you're dealing with an avoidant personality, silence doesn't land the way you might think. It's not simply a pause, it's a trigger. In the early stages of no contact, the avoidant feels relief. They thrive on space, so your withdrawal initially feels like pressure being lifted. But here's the twist: that relief doesn't last. Over time, that same silence begins to echo. It stirs up questions, doubts, and, ironically, the very feelings they've been running from. Avoidants often believe closeness equals danger, so when you disappear, it doesn't immediately spark longing, it sparks a sense of control. Finally, I can breathe. Yet as days pass, that control can morph into curiosity. They start to wonder, why haven't I heard anything? Were they really okay without me? Did they move on? And that curiosity eats away at their certainty. Here's the real truth: no contact isn't a game to manipulate them. It's a boundary you set to reclaim your own power and peace. And while it might stir reflection in the avoidant, the real transformation is in you, because you're no longer chasing, convincing, or trying to prove your worth. You're letting silence speak for you. So yes, no contact impacts them, but its greatest impact is the clarity it gives you. You start to see that their push-pull cycle is about their fear, not your value. And once you recognize that, you stop making their silence a measure of your self-worth. When you go into no contact with an avoidant, the first reaction they have is not panic, not despair, and not even sadness. It's relief. This can feel incredibly confusing if you're the one implementing the silence, because from your perspective, you've just created a void that you imagine will immediately make them miss you. But the psychology of an avoidant works differently. For them, space feels like oxygen. When you step back, it temporarily confirms what they've been craving all along: distance. To the avoidant, intimacy often feels like pressure. Even small, natural expressions of closeness, a text to check in, a request to spend more time together, or an attempt to deepen the relationship, can trigger a subconscious alarm in their mind that whispers, "This is too much." So when no contact begins, it feels as though the weight has been lifted. They get to exhale. They tell themselves, "Finally, I don't have to explain, justify, or defend my need for space." This relief is powerful because it validates the very belief system that fuels their avoidant tendencies, the idea that closeness threatens their independence and distance restores it. It's important to recognize that this initial sense of relief doesn't mean they don't care about you. It means that their nervous system is wired to prioritize safety over connection. For an avoidant, safety is found in distance, not closeness. That's why, in the beginning, silence feels like sanctuary. If you imagine their emotional world like a rubber band, no contact is the moment the band snaps back into its resting position after being stretched too tightly. There's a sense of release, a sense of return to what feels normal. This is also why so many people get tricked during this stage. When they don't see an immediate reaction from the avoidant, no chase, no sudden outpouring of emotion, no desperate attempt to reconnect, they start to panic. They think the silence isn't working. What they don't realize is that the avoidant's first response is almost always to retreat deeper into themselves. They're not rushing to fill the space you've left because, in the short term, that space is exactly what soothes them. The mistake many people make is to break no contact too early, assuming the lack of visible response means the avoidant doesn't care. In reality, what's happening is more complex. In this initial stage, the avoidant is simply experiencing the comfort of not having to manage closeness. It doesn't mean the relationship didn't matter to them or that they won't eventually feel the weight of your absence. It just means that their instinctive reaction to silence is to settle into it rather than resist it. Understanding this phase is crucial because it helps you avoid misinterpreting their behavior. Their relief is not proof of indifference, it's proof of their wiring. It's the first chapter in a longer psychological process that unfolds during no contact. If you mistake this relief for a final verdict, you'll miss the deeper shifts that start to happen once the silence lingers and that initial comfort begins to transform into something more unsettling. As the silence of no contact stretches beyond the initial days or weeks, something begins to shift inside the avoidant. What once felt like freedom slowly starts to transform into an unfamiliar tension. The quiet that gave them relief now leaves them with more room for thought, and those thoughts don't always feel safe. Curiosity begins to creep in. It's not the kind of curiosity that comes from genuine openness, it's more of a restless whisper in the back of their mind. Why haven't I heard anything? What are they doing without me? Did they actually move on? For someone who once felt in control, by creating space, this unexpected uncertainty can be deeply unsettling. Avoidants are not strangers to pulling away. They've spent much of their lives managing intimacy by keeping people at a distance. But there's a difference between them choosing to create space and you choosing to hold your boundary by going silent. When they retreat, they feel secure because they've set the terms. But when you go into no contact, the dynamic changes. They are no longer in control of the distance you are, and with that comes an undercurrent of insecurity. Even if they don't consciously admit it, they begin to wonder what your silence means. At first, they might brush it off. They'll tell themselves stories like, they'll reach out eventually, or they always come back. But the longer you hold firm, the more those stories lose power. This is when curiosity sharpens. They may check your social media, ask mutual friends about you, or replay old conversations in their mind. The silence forces them to confront the possibility that you aren't waiting in the wings anymore. And for an avoidant who has relied on the reassurance of your pursuit, this absence begins to feel heavier than they expected. What's happening beneath the surface is that your silence challenges their belief system. They've always assumed that if they pulled away, you'd lean in. That pattern has reinforced their sense of control. But now, no contact disrupts the rhythm. The longer you remain distant, the more their inner dialogue shifts from confidence to doubt. They start questioning whether the freedom they valued so much is worth the risk of losing you entirely. And though they may not be ready to admit it openly, that curiosity begins to carry a sting of vulnerability. This stage can be difficult for you because you don't see these shifts happening on the outside. Avoidants are skilled at hiding their inner world, so their curiosity may not show up as a text or a phone call. Instead, it brews quietly in their private thoughts. They may even double down on their independence just to mask the fact that they're beginning to feel unsettled. But make no mistake, silence that once felt like relief is now starting to press on them, awakening questions they never had to face when you were always available to close the gap. Even as curiosity starts to stir during no contact, the avoidant's deepest instinct remains the same: to protect themselves from closeness. This is the paradox that defines their experience. On one hand, the silence unsettles them, raising questions about your absence. On the other, the idea of re-engaging with you, of stepping back into intimacy, triggers the same fears that pushed them away in the first place. Their mind associates closeness with loss of control, loss of freedom, and the potential for rejection or engulfment. So even when part of them wants to know where you are and what you're feeling, another part quickly throws up a wall, whispering, "Don't go there. It's safer not to feel." This internal tug of war is exhausting, but it's also familiar to them. Avoidants have spent years, sometimes their whole lives, developing strategies to manage these fears. They may rationalize their distance by telling themselves you were too demanding, or the relationship wasn't right, or they simply weren't ready. These narratives aren't always lies. They're defenses. They help the avoidant justify why they need to retreat rather than confront the vulnerability that comes with connection. No contact doesn't erase these defenses. It often makes them louder at first. The more silence weighs on them, the more their fear of intimacy reminds them why they shouldn't reach out. To the avoidant, reaching out carries risk. It means stepping into the very arena where they feel least equipped, emotional vulnerability. If they call, text, or try to reconnect, they fear being drawn back into a closeness they're not sure they can sustain. They also fear rejection, even if they don't admit it. So instead, they often retreat further into logic and self-protection. They convince themselves it's better to stay quiet, even as curiosity keeps nudging them. This is why no contact can look like indifference from the outside. What's really happening is that their fear is overriding their longing. It's important to understand that their fear of intimacy isn't about you personally. It's about the way they've learned to survive emotionally. For many avoidants, closeness once felt dangerous, whether in childhood or past relationships. Their nervous system equates intimacy with pain, criticism, or suffocation. So even when they miss you, that longing is tangled with dread. Your absence creates space for them to feel the discomfort of loss, but the thought of breaking that silence reactivates their core fear. If I get close again, I'll lose myself or get hurt. From your perspective, this can be confusing and even hurtful. You may wonder how someone could miss you and yet avoid you at the same time, but this is the dual reality of the avoidant mind. No contact confronts them with both sides of their internal struggle, the ache of your absence and the terror of closeness. And though they may not act on it right away, this tension begins to carve cracks in the armor they've built, forcing them to feel emotions they've worked so hard to keep buried. No contact is often misunderstood as a strategy to make the other person miss you or chase you. When people first hear about it, they imagine it's a game of silence, a clever trick to flip the power dynamic. But in reality, no contact is not about manipulation at all. It's not about pulling strings or waiting for a specific reaction. It's about boundaries. It's about drawing a line that says, I respect myself enough to step back from what hurts me, and I'm not going to beg for attention that isn't freely given. The power of no contact doesn't lie in how the avoidant responds. It lies in the fact that you've reclaimed your space. This distinction matters because the avoidant's behavior can be unpredictable. Sometimes they do come back after weeks or months, fueled by curiosity or longing. Sometimes they don't. If your only goal in going no contact is to manipulate them into returning, you'll find yourself constantly waiting, checking your phone, and analyzing their silence. That keeps you tied to them emotionally, even if there's no actual communication. No contact was never meant to become another way of chasing. It's meant to be an act of self-protection and clarity. When you step into no contact with that mindset, the focus shifts. You're no longer asking, will they notice I'm gone? Instead, you're asking, what happens to me when I stop pouring energy into someone who doesn't meet me halfway? That question creates space for real healing, because while the avoidant may eventually feel unsettled by your silence, the real transformation is happening in you. You're learning to tolerate the discomfort of not reaching out, of not rescuing, of not proving your worth. That discipline is what builds strength. For the avoidant, your silence is a disruption. For you, it's a declaration. It's you refusing to engage in the old cycle where they pulled away and you tried harder, where they resisted and you explained more, where they distanced and you begged for closeness. By breaking that cycle, you stop reinforcing the very dynamic that drained you. You stop teaching them that you'll always be there no matter how little they give. And whether they notice it consciously or not, that boundary shifts the entire balance of the relationship. The irony is that the avoidant may actually interpret your silence as indifference at first, but that doesn't diminish its value, because your goal isn't to convince them of your worth. It's to live as if your worth doesn't need convincing. When you stop trying to control their reaction, you begin to control what you can, your choices, your energy, your peace of mind. No contact becomes less about getting them back and more about getting yourself back. It transforms from a tactic into a statement. You will not play games with your dignity, and you will not compromise your boundaries just to be chosen. The most powerful shift that happens during no contact isn't inside the avoidant. It's inside you. At the beginning, it may feel like all your attention is on them, on what they're thinking, on whether they miss you, on how long it will take for them to reach out. But as time passes, something deeper begins to unfold. You start to notice that the silence gives you back something you didn't realize you'd lost: your clarity. Without the constant cycle of push and pull, without the emotional labor of trying to decode their mixed signals, you begin to hear your own voice again. That voice asks questions you couldn't ask while you were caught in the whirlwind. What do I really want? What do I actually deserve? Am I settling for crumbs because I'm afraid to lose them? This is where no contact becomes more than just a boundary. It becomes a mirror. Every day you hold your silence, you're reminded that your value is not dependent on someone else's response. You're teaching yourself that your worth doesn't rise or fall with a text, a call, or an ounce of validation. That lesson is liberating, even if it's painful at first, because the truth is, when you were chasing, you were outsourcing your sense of self-worth to their behavior. If they pulled away, you questioned yourself. If they leaned in, you felt secure. Now, in the stillness of no contact, you're reclaiming that power. This doesn't mean the feelings vanish overnight. You may still miss them deeply, still long for connection, still hope they'll come back. But the difference is that you no longer let those feelings dictate your actions. You stop running after someone who can't meet you in the middle. You stop making excuses for why their distance is acceptable. Instead, you learn to sit with the discomfort and grow stronger in it. And that growth shows up in ways you might not expect. You sleep better, your focus sharpens, you start to invest more in friendships, passions, and goals that had been neglected while you were wrapped up in the cycle. Over time, you also begin to see the relationship for what it truly was, not just what you wanted it to be. When you're not busy trying to fix, convince, or hold it together, you gain perspective. You see how much effort you poured in compared to what you received. You notice the red flags you once brushed off. You start to understand that their distance wasn't a reflection of your inadequacy, but of their own fear and limitations. That realization is painful, but it's also freeing. It loosens the grip of self-blame and replaces it with compassion for yourself. By the time the avoidant begins to feel the full impact of your silence, you've already started to change. Whether they come back or not, you are no longer the same person who would chase, beg, or compromise endlessly. You've learned that your peace is not negotiable. And while no contact may stir uncertainty in their mind, it creates certainty in yours. You know now that your value doesn't depend on their closeness, and your life doesn't pause while they decide what they want. So when we peel back the layers of what really happens in the avoidance mind during no contact, we see a fascinating but conflicted process. The relief they feel at first, the curiosity that starts to creep in, the fear of intimacy that still holds them back, the disruption caused by your boundary, and finally, the real transformation that happens in you. And that last part is the most important. Because no matter what's going on in their mind, no matter how tangled their fears and defenses may be, the real gift of no contact is the clarity it gives you. It shows you that you don't need to chase love in order to deserve it. It teaches you that silence can speak louder than persuasion, and it proves that your peace of mind is worth more than someone else's inconsistency. So if you remember anything, remember this: no contact is not about punishing them or winning them back. It's about protecting your energy, reclaiming your value, and reminding yourself that the right connection won't make you beg for closeness. It will meet you halfway. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for giving yourself permission to grow through this process. Your time and presence mean everything, and I hope you leave with more strength, more clarity, and more belief in your own worth. Until next time, take care of yourself, keep your boundaries strong, and thank you once again